It's very, very dangerous.
Get these spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
And I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something,
Keep that crowd warmed up. Is Mr. Yahola Tiger.
What's going on, y'all? And welcome to another edition, 106 of the Warcry Podcast. I am your host, Yahola Tiger. I'm giving y'all something right before 4th of July to kind of keep y'all in a state of fear. No, I'm just kidding. I want y'all to be so scared y'all don't want to be going outside at night. But this is another edition of This Is Creepy. So I'm going to be sharing stories from different, I have a family member story from my cousin. And then I'll have a story from Big Indian, which I need to have these people on, but they've shared stories. And then I have a few other stories that have been shared to me that I will share as well. Some of these, if you're members, you've heard them. But for those who haven't, this is your time. Or if you want to just remember, if you just want to be, man, that was a good story. I like to hear that. But on this episode, we're going to be sharing a lot of those. For those of you guys who are new to the podcast, I have not done a This Is Creepy in a long time. So I thought I'd bring it back right during the summertime. But this is kind of like a listener stories. People will send me stories, and I will just collect them, and I will share them to you guys. If you want to share a scary story or a spooky story or just a story in general, please message me. You can message me on YouTube now. I think they have a YouTube Messenger. TikTok, WarcryPod, or the email, realwarcrypod@gmail.com. Send me your stories if you want to be featured on This Is Creepy, and please let me know in your message or email if you want to remain anonymous. If I don't see anything where it says, hey, you can tell my name, or you can, my tribal nation or whatever, I just keep you anonymous. So just a heads up on that. But send them in, and we'll do another one around Halloween.
First incident happened at my boyfriend's house in Tahlequah. And he lives behind that Elm Church, or lived behind the Elm Church, where the Sonic and all that. There's the Elm Church, the metal building, and there's a row of Cherokee homes.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Well, the first incident is I couldn't find my phone, right? And he calls it, and I found my phone. Well, I picked it up, and he's sitting in front of me, about a couple of arms length away. And my phone answers, and it says, hello? And I did this, and I put it down. I didn't say a word, but it was on my phone. You can hear me say, hello? And he kind of had big eyes, I said, what the hell? And I was like, well, we better see her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's when I kind of knew things were around, because we would see like we're in the bedroom, let's say we're folding towels, and you can see something crawl going around the corner of the bed. And I looked at him, I said, man, there's something going on. It's way more beyond us, And so we seated again and stuff, and kept it up for a whole, what we're supposed to do. Well, we would see things at the corner of our eye, and just got where we got used to it. January 1st is the day I moved out of 2024. And I didn't even tell my family this story, okay? Well, he left with his cousin, and I was getting all my belongings in baskets and boxes and bags, right? Well, every time I go to the living room and take a bag and set it down in the living room on that carpet, I would see this.
Oh, man.
And then I would see it in the display case that has crowns and different, stuff in their beadwork paintings that's set in the corner. And I looked at it, and I could see go, And I said, oh, okay. I see what you're doing. I said, you keep up doing what you're doing. Don't mind me. I said, I'm fixing to leave anyway. So I was waiting on Poking them to come pick me up so I could move back to Shakota. And it was just like a constant. Every 5-10 minutes, I see these shadow figures ducking behind stuff, going from the bathroom to my craft room that I had. It'd just be like this. And all this activity was going on, right? And I stood there and I said, I don't know what you are. I said, but you're not going to get the best of me. I said, you stay here. I said, I think you've done plenty. Whatever you are, or whatever you did, or whoever you are, I said, you've done plenty. It's all yours now. You can have it. I said, I don't want it. I said, I give it all to you. I said, but you can't have me. But I'm leaving. So up until Poking them pick me up, I kept seeing those shadow figures go by, or they duck under a box. And then when I left, I said, God bless you. If you change, I hope it's for good, or you just leave, or whatever you do. I said, but I'm out. And that was it. Last time I ever seen a shadow figure was that night.
Man, and they say a lot of those times with those shadow figures that you always see them out of the corner of your eyes. That's crazy. You saw them just out like that.
Yeah, right in front of me. It's like I could do this and it'll go, then it'd hide behind, right in front, like right when I was looking at it. And I had a few months went by, and I had asked if he was seeing things in his house, and he goes, I'm really not here to pay attention to it. He goes, I work now, and I said, well, that's good. But he quit sleeping in the bedroom and he started sleeping in the living room. And he got where he would see her more than he ever did before. But I think he was dealing with some shit in his house, But I made sure it didn't follow my ass. You know what I mean? I made sure of that. And he passed away on September 29th of last year. He had stage 4 lung cancer. And I told him, I said, whatever's in your house is probably still there. And he said, yeah. He goes, if you ever need a place to stay, he goes, my sister has the key. I said, no, I'm good. I said, yeah. We spent our lives together and went through a bunch of stuff. I said, but you know what? That's one thing I don't want is that house. I said, I want nothing. I just want you to make your transition good. Go where you're supposed to go. And I've never seen a black shadow after that, after I left his home.
So that story's from my cousin over on my dad's side. She, will come into the lives and share stories. But that's one thing, too, that I asked her after this story is, do you think it was death? And she believes it was. Because when they started seeing this was like early or late 2023 and then 2024 when she started seeing this. So these shadow people, man, you don't know why you're seeing them. You don't know, in what manner. I think death presents itself in many ways. And that's what she believed what it was, because as you can tell, her boyfriend passed away. And so it's interesting to know that there's different things out there that you just don't really know what the meaning of it is. And as I mentioned on the last episode about owls, you just don't know. And so you always kind of, oh, it could be this or it could be that. And then when it happens, you kind of look in hindsight like, oh, that's what that was. All right, the next episode, dang, we on episode 107? No, but next story I want to tell is out of Lawton, Oklahoma. And this person sent this in, talking, I guess they were at a powwow long, long time ago out in Lawton. And during this powwow, they was all, dancing, going through the routines and everything that you do at powwows. And, kind of out of nowhere, I don't want to say out of nowhere, but just off to the side, there was a beautiful, real beautiful, pretty Indian girl come kind of making her way on, and she starts dancing. Well, everybody's having a good time. Everybody's just dancing away, and, all of a sudden, they kind of see, in that, the dance, that beautiful woman kicked her moccasin off. And so there was a gentleman come up and he, was trying to help her put it back on. But as he went to put it back on, he looked and she had hooves for feet. And the gentleman yells, "Dear woman, dear woman." Everybody, kind of looked around and was like, "Oh no," like all of a sudden the lights go out and she takes off. And they went to try to get her, try to chase her, and they couldn't find her. And like I said, this was a long time ago. But that there was one gentleman who just kept looking. He was not going to take no for an answer. He was going to find the dear woman. And he never came back. And you hear these stories. I've heard a couple stories of Muskogee Creek Reds, them talking about, she being out here. I've told the story about out of Hominy when we was in a storytelling event. There was a real pretty Indian girl that showed up in a white dress. Nobody saw her except for a few men. And we always joke, "Dang, ain't living right. You trying to get tempted." No. That's what some of those jokes that was flying about that. But they said they saw her. I don't know. We looked through all the pictures. Somebody looked through pictures that they were taken, and they ain't seen no girl that matched that description in the crowd. So you just never know.
North, they have something called water babies.
Okay.
They have a lot of those, and I've seen and heard them. They're really scary, and what they are is they're back in the day when rations were hard to come by and everything. These women would have children and they couldn't take care of them, and so they would take them to the river and they'd put them in the water, and they would drown, and they these kids would be in the water, and they would kind of gather, and their spirit was still in the water, and they're still children, but you can hear them crying late at night in the water. And as time went on, they would sunbathe on the side of the river banks, and when you pull up on them, they'd jump back in the water. And if you're unlucky, you would be one of the ones they would grab on the side of a riverbank and try to pull you in, and they would try to take you. That I guess take you for food or whatever. I don't know, but they would try to lure you in and take you in the water. And there's a lot of people who's been drowned that way. That they don't know what the cause of it was, but a lot of people said it's just water babies grabbed them.
Mm.
Now, I remember one time, a friend of mine, he picked me up, and I lived in town at the time. He picked me up, and he went and picked up this other kid, and he was a non-tribal, and he was sitting there. We're cruising around. And he said, "There is well, we're going to go do something." I was like, "Okay, that's cool." And so we're driving, and I realized where we're going at. There's a place called Bottoms, and it's a wetland. And I realized where it was going. I was like, "Dude, I'm not going down there." He's like, "No, it's going to be okay. We're going to be down there just for a little while." I was like, "No, I don't want to go down there. I do not want to go down there at all." And we went down there, and I said, "I'm not getting out of this car, and I'm going to stay right here on this bridge." And they got out of they got out of the car, and they went down to the side of the bridge, and they're sitting in there. And that kid, the non-tribal, wanted to see something. He wanted to experience something, is what he wanted. And that kid, my friend, he wanted to give him that experience. And so that kid got in the water, and he's in the middle of the water splashing around. "Come get me, come get me." And I was like, "Oh my God, this isn't going to end well." I'm sitting there, and I'm on the top of the bridge, and I'm sitting there having a cigarette. I was like, "This isn't going to end well. This is going to be bad." And my friend, he's on the riverbank. He's sitting there kind of laughing, joking, kind of egging him on. And I was like, "Dude, let's go, let's go." And I look downriver, and I see all these little black shadows downriver, and they're swimming upward. I was like, "Oh shit, it's not going to be good." I was like, "Get out of the water now, get out of the water." And they're saying, "No, I want something to happen." I was like, "Well, it's something about to happen. Get out of the water." And you see all these little black things swimming upriver toward him. And finally, my friend started walking up the side of the bridge. He's getting ready to get out, and he's like, "Come on, let's go." And so that the non-tribal kid, he gets out. He starts coming out of the water, and my friend gets up to the top of the bridge. He's sitting there kind of laughing, and all of a sudden, that kid starts screaming, "Something's got me! Something's got me!" And he freaks out, and he runs back down to go help him. And I'm sitting at the top of the bridge. I was like, I told you something bad's gonna happen. I'm just sitting there. Then you can hear the babies crying. It just sounds like a little child crying. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's gonna get him. It's gonna get him. And my friend ran down and grabbed that kid and he pulled him out of the water. And something had a hold of his ankles, preventing him from getting out of the water. And he's freaking out. Finally they get out of the water. They come running up to the car. And I was like, I told you. I told you. Are you happy now? And so we all get in the car and we're leaving. And instead of going the way we came, he decided to go around it's like a big old horseshoe. He decides to go around that horseshoe. I was like, oh my God, what the fuck are you doing? Let's get out of here. He's like, no, man, that was crazy, this and that. I was like, oh my God. And I'm freaking out. We got to get the hell out of here. And we finally get on the other side of the horseshoe and there's another bridge because it crosses the river. And he pulls over on top of the bridge. I was like, dude, what are we doing here? Let's get out of here. This is freaky. Let's go. He stops and rolls his window down. And we're sitting there. I was like, let's just chill out here for a minute. Let's see what we could hear. And right after he said that, you can hear all these babies crying. There must have been about maybe 9 or 10 of them. You can hear them all crying. I'm just like, oh my God, dude, are you happy? Let's go. Let's get the hell out of here. And he's sitting there kind of freaking out. The kid in the back, he's all paranoid. He's tripping out hard. And he finally freaks out. We finally leave the place. And we're going down the road. I was like, oh my God, are you happy now? And I'm getting mad at everybody at this point. You had your experience. This is not fun. This is not cool. What if you'd have got? What if somebody took you? Because I'm not going to tell anybody what's happened. Your mom and dad's going to say, what happened to you? I was like, I don't know. He got in the water. Next thing you know, he's gone. We're just sitting there and I'm yelling at everybody going down the road. And we went back down the road. We get to the place where we entered the place and we saw a cop car and he's doing a U-turn. I was like, fuck, man, there's a cop right there. And nobody's allowed down there at night. It's off limits. And so it was like, oh man, I was like, okay, we'll pull up next to him. And so I rolled the window down. We pulled up next to him. He's like, what are you guys doing down here? He's like, oh, we had to pick up our friend. He got stranded down the road, but we went and picked him up. And so now we're leaving. We're getting out of here. It's okay, good. Get out of here. You don't need to be down here at night. And it's like, yeah, we're doing that. We just want to let you know we're leaving. And so he sees a non-tribal kid in the back. And he's sitting there. He's like, where was he at? He said, he was the one that was down the road. Somebody dropped him off and we went and picked him up, but we're getting out of here. And so he followed us all the way out. We got out of there. We took that kid home, and I'm yelling at my friend, like, what the fuck, man? Why would you do that? If you both got caught, I would have said nothing. That was what you deserve. You deserve to get got. I'm not going to sit there and vouch for you, tell everybody what happened. I'm not going to tell your story. What's the matter with you? It's, well, he said he wanted experience. I said, well, he got the experience. It scared the hell out of him. What happens if he tells his mom and dad? Are you going to explain to him what happened? And he's like, well, no, not really. I was like, see, exactly. There's a reason why you don't do these things. And so he wouldn't drop me off and they took off. He went home. But it was a freaky experience, just hearing all those kids crying. They sound like little babies, and I'm just like, oh my God. They're little black children. They're completely black with red eyes. And
Oh man.
they got long black hair, and they swim in the water, so you can see them coming upstream, and I'm just like, oh my God, it was freaky.
Big Indian always has these good stories, and go follow him on TikTok, Big Indian. Um, but I hadn't heard a lot of stories about water babies. You hear a little bit of it, but I hadn't heard a story like this. And one thing that's very prevalent, and I always say this, and I'll say this because sometimes this is the first episode a non-native person has ever heard. But like his story, they say they want to experience something until they do, and it don't go the way that they thought it was going to go. Because once you run into these things, and I'm water babies, obviously, but like I'm talking just in general, when you run into these things, you have no control over the situation, but you can get out of there. It's a choice, and I'm glad he brought that up because that's a lot of experiences that I think Native people we have with our non-native people, other people, friends, family, whatever. And it becomes something more, because now you have to explain what this person saw. And a lot of times that then gets spread around, and next thing you have people going down there, and that's how things happen to people. I'm glad that he did mention that in that story. One thing too that I enjoy about that story is that the police officer and the government around it knows that there's something going on down here, but they can't explain it, and so they just cordon it off to people. And if you're somebody who is in that role, get a hold of me, because I want to know. And we don't have to share it publicly or whatever, but I'm curious about this. I always talk about the Illinois River every summer. Every summer, there's at least one drowning every weekend. Ten Killer, Thunderbird, Grand Lake. There are drownings all the time during the summertime, but they never go reported, or you might hear one or two, every other week or so. And I've talked about that, and I think that's something that my podcast talks about, and I want to share it to people, because as someone who has frequented water and know what's in the water, I'm a little less hesitant to disrespect the water. And also, too, if you see the signs of something that isn't right, get out of the water. And I'm glad Big Indian shared that story. Like I said, go follow him. But if you go looking for something, it's going to find you first. These next sets of stories are regarding Black Panthers. Now, I believe in them. I think they're around. And I've received multiple stories around the Shawnee, Oklahoma area regarding these Black Panthers. Now, I have shared a video over on TikTok about someone seeing what looked like a Black Panther on video. He sent it to me, and I shared it. I don't know. I think it is. But this next story happened in the early 2000s around Shawnee. And this person has a kind of a family land type compound, I guess is kind of how I would describe it, but they described it as just family land, and people live on the land. But their relative was out, staying in a tent off in the kind of the wooded area of their land. Well, this relative thought he heard something kind of off in the trees. And so he kind of off behind the tent that he was staying in. And he started kind of walking around, seeing if he could get a better look. Also, he looks up, and there's a black tail swinging from the limb. And he follows the tail, and there's a Black Panther sitting there. Now, on the same family land, as the years roll on, they kept, having what they thought was Black Panther experiences. Well, one night they were, this is fairly more recent than early 2000s. But the family was just kind of, getting their rest, and it's middle of the night, and all of a sudden they hear this, and the mixture of a woman and an animal scream, and it woke everybody up. Well, the next morning they got out there, and they were seeing big paw prints all over the property. They kind of looked in the direction they heard it, and lo and behold, they found it. Well, this person also thinks that, or knows for a fact, that Black Hawk Casino has video, or they had videos of this Black Panther. So if you're in the Shawnee area and you have heard something similar to like this, let me know. So I believe this next story happened in 2024. At the time that this person sent this story, I believe it was in late 2025. So it's either 2024 or 2025 when this story happened. But they were out near Hannah, Oklahoma. Now, I don't want to give out specific information because I don't want people going out there, but especially with the area, it's part of some grounds. But they were out there, they just going to hang out, have a family type thing. And, it wasn't during any, ceremonies or anything. It just was a family wanted to go out there because it was her husband's grounds. And so they were just going to camp out, hang out, just hang out, family stuff. Well, there's other people there. They were taking care of the grounds, making sure everything was clean, and so they just started getting kind of later. And they decided, well, we'll just stay here and camp. Nothing too crazy. And, they had the fire going, and they were, thinking about cooking some bologna. Well, dang, I know what you're saying. You whip out the bologna, man, things start happening. Especially out, just can't help ourselves. It's about 10 or 11 o'clock, and they're hanging out and getting ready to eat, and all of a sudden they hear this growl sound. It sounds like it's coming from over in the woods. And they kind of get startled. And they're like, what was that? And so she told her husband, she's like, well, I kind of want to go to town anyways. We need to get out of here. So they left everything, took off in the car and went back into town. I think it was Hannah, I think is the town. And so they come back the next day and nothing was touched. Not even the bologna meat. So whatever it wasn't after the bologna, but I think it just wanted them to get out of there, because with a lot of these places, there are different beings that are surrounding or around. It's just it's like a pool almost. I've heard stories of Bigfoot during these ceremonies where they start coming out and they're, not dancing, but they're swaying. You hear these different stories, and I've heard different stories. I think this one's out of Cherokee Nation, but it was like they're having ceremonial grounds or powwow or something, but all of a sudden they started hearing something yelling, like it was yelling in a circle, like it was running around the grounds in a circle around them while they were hitting the drums and doing ceremony. So there's things that come out during these ceremonies, and it's just fascinating that nothing was going on. There was no ceremonies. They were just hanging out, and there was something growling at them out in those woods. And I want to say this too about Hannah, that little small town. That town, I have heard a few stories. When I posted a story about on TikTok, I don't want to say the guy's name. His last name's Harjo. He shared a story at a storytelling event, and you follow, as a kid, I've heard this story growing up about Hannah and this house. And there's just different creepy things that are going on in Hannah. I've heard, people riding around. I can't remember what highway or what road, but there was something chasing them, like a beast or a monster. So Hannah's creepy. I had one guy confirmed a story that I told on TikTok about Harjo. He was out with his friends, and you guys have probably heard this story, but he was out and he said, I'm gonna take a rest by this tree. He was getting real kind of tired, and he woke up in this bed in this house that was fully furnished, and he had someone else's clothes on. And I've told that story, and I asked somebody when I was going to school at Tahlequah in NSU, and they were like, yeah, there's something like that out there. We've heard that a few times. So Hannah's creepy. Now, don't be going out there. Don't be trying to walk the roads by yourself. This is a warning. I'm just saying, you might see something, but you'd rather not. But yeah, Hannah's very, very, very spooky. Another story I'm thinking about as I'm thinking about all these stories and looking through my notes for this episode is somebody was telling me a story about out in kind of Tahlequah, outside of Tahlequah, I believe. But there's a road out there, and this person who's telling me the story, their relative was headed home. And all of a sudden, they kind of were driving down the road. I think this is Kenwood, I believe. I could be wrong. But somewhere out in Tahlequah area. I have to go re-look at my notes, y'all. I'm sorry. I apologize. But they come rolling down the road, and all of a sudden they see something in the road. And they don't really know what it is, but they get up closer, and it's a coffin. And they're like, what the hell is that? And so as they try to pass it on this road, they try to go around it, it moved, not letting them pass. And these are these signs that tell you, hey, we might not want to go up here. There's something up here that you don't want to see. And I thought I get goosebumps telling that story, because I can imagine rolling up and you're just like, oh, just trying to go home. And the coffin's in your way. And I can't even imagine what that coffin was for. But you just never know, especially out in Kenwood or all these little small towns out here. Marble City's another one. Just never know what's out here. This next story is pretty scary. I'm not gonna lie. So this is takes place outside of Pegs, around Locust Grove area, and like kind of in between Tahlequah. So in that kind of little area, that's not a little area. It's pretty big, but in that vicinity, more like Pegs, Locust Grove, that type of area. And she's telling me this story about their house that they had moved into. So she always got a weird feeling. Like she always felt like something was watching them. And so they would always kind of shut the windows and shut, different things and make sure that nothing could peer in at them. 'Cause she always felt like something was out in those woods when it got dark. Before the story I'm going to tell you, I'm giving you some backstory. They had a dog that was ripped to shreds and put out front in front of their house. They had a screen door ripped off the hinges and it basically tore up the frame. This thing pulled it so hard, and they had to replace the entire frame. So this is spooky now. She's don't know what it is, but her boyfriend and his friend were out on the front porch one night. So her boyfriend's friend is Muskogee Creek, and that night she just felt like she heard a sound that sounded like an owl mixed with a fox cry. And she immediately got sick. So she went out there and said, "Hey, this is what's happening. I feel sick." And so her boyfriend's friends was like, "Well, drink some water and go sit down." And so she did that, and she was inside. So he walked out from what, was told to her, that he walked out into the middle of the yard, and she said he made these sounds that she can't describe, but he made the sounds. All of a sudden she heard the same sound again from a different end of the property. And all of a sudden it just kind of stopped after he made a few more of those sounds. What she, ended up telling me is that he knew some things from his grandmother to protect him. So that night, after everything kind of settles down, she kind of feels more at peace in this home. And the preceding nights, when they would go out at night, it was a lot different. She said that she felt something in the woods around their house, but the feeling was not as if it was like waiting for them to get them, like it was watching them to get them. It was more watching to protect them. Now, she doesn't know what he did or what the sounds that he made, her boyfriend's friend, but he knew his grandmother knew things that taught him some things, and now they're more at peace in this area outside around Pegs. But they just never know what kind of attack or what kind of entity or being that's around, especially if we've never been there. When you move into a new house, the previous person could have been doing things that doesn't align with you, and your energy and their energy collides. Now, I don't know if this is a Bigfoot or a Dogman, but what's fascinating to me is that all of this stuff was happening to them, especially their dog getting ripped up. Like, that's kind of, all right, something serious is wrong here. Like, somebody did something to make this thing mad or shot at it, and now it's coming for them. Now, she had another story out of Kenwood. Now, on this podcast, I've told quite a few, well, a fraction of different Kenwood stories. Well, this one takes place with her coworker, a friend of hers. And they had a house out at Kenwood. And the uncle who lived there had passed, and so now the daughter took it over. Well, they were over there, and they thought they heard like thumping sounds, and they didn't really know what it was, but they, kind of didn't think nothing of it. And then they heard it again, but it sounded like splashing, like 2 feet splashing. She describes it as kind of hopping. They go outside. They go outside, and all of a sudden they see a 6-foot tall rabbit. And they look up and they see that another relative is laughing because the relative who had died in his house was a trickster. He liked playing tricks on people. He'd turn the lights out on them, or he'd just do little small things to kind of mess with them, to kind of spook them out. But that's outside of Kenwood.
Always believe there's an underworld. That's what I think. We have our uncle on it'd be our aunt, her ex-husband. He's Creek, and he told a story. They used to go to church in Holdenville, because that's where he's from, I believe. Well, he has since passed, but he told a story that I guess they had camp houses out there too, like at Wishafala. And I guess they were sleeping in them, and said they woke up in the, I guess, middle of the night, and him and his brother seen a devil.
God.
What they believed to be, yeah. It said it had a long tail and it was moving back and forth.
Man.
Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm.
That's what they described as seeing. And it was standing there looking at him, and its tail was moving. Yeah, I remember him telling that story. I always thought that was odd.
I heard a story. A guy that I went to Cherokee camp with, his grandpa was on YouTube. Cherokee Nation put his story up there, but I remember hearing him talk about his grandpa's story. But basically, one night they was all kind of messing around, and all of a sudden they kind of heard something off. I think they're at the cemetery, I believe. I'm just kind of paraphrasing, but they looked up in the tree, and there was a little red devil sitting on that tree limb.
What the
He
hell?
said, look, plain as day, like the devil, red and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's what that dude said. That's what our uncle said. Horns and everything.
If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. You never know what's out here. You never know what's in these woods. And if you guys hear my kids in the background, they're currently watching some Elmo. But this is kind of funny, but my oldest, sometimes I'll record the podcast around her, and I'll be playing like clips of the podcast out loud. And I guess my wife was telling me that she took her to the side and said, I got to tell you a scary story. And so she started telling scary stories to my wife. And I was like, she never tells me any scary stories. I think it's because she's listening. And that's what it's all about. It's what this podcast is about, is just sharing information and trying to do it as respectfully as you can, especially when you're talking about things that affect us. And I'm always trying to learn as much as I can and pass on as much as I can. And so I hope that this podcast, and I hope these, even though it is very spooky or scary, or, sometimes it may rock your beliefs, or may challenge beliefs you've had, or, whatever it may be. But there's things out here, and they're very real. On the next episode of This Is Creepy, I want to put this in y'all's mind to be thinking about if you have a story you want to tell. But I have a gentleman, military guy, came forward about some green-eyed thing he saw out in southwestern Oklahoma. So that'll be on the next This Is Creepy during Halloween. I don't know how I'm looking on terms of interviews. I know I got a few people I need to ask. I want to give a shout out, but also promote Skull Crawlers. If you don't follow them, go follow them on YouTube. I believe they're on Spotify and Apple. Basically, kind of similar to my layout. But they had my cousin Jay Duncan on, and his wife Judith, and he tells some stories that are very familiar. He's my cousin on the Lewis side, so you guys have heard me tell stories about Jackson Lewis, Medicine Man back. One of my ancestors, and it's his great grandfather or great great grandfather. One of those two. It's his grandfather. But there's all these different things out here, that information that each one of us have regarding something. Eventually, I will be sharing. I have to get my dad's permission first. There was a Jackson Lewis reunion that my dad got stories from some of these elders. But it's his information. It's his stories. It's he's the one that recorded them, so I need to get the approval for that, and I may need to ask some other people too. But they talk about, these different beings and entities that are just not being talked about anymore, and hopefully I'll be able to share that with you guys Might do it on the next This Is Creepy, so we got some time. And I don't know how long it is. I know that he just said he recorded a few stories that, you know, we have the, like, the title, like we have the being, we know the being, but we just don't have the stories that, you know, go along, or, you know, the information that we need to properly talk about these beings. But if you have a story and you want to share a story and you want to remain anonymous, please do. It's a, you know, I have kept out a lot of locations and information, as you guys have told, you could tell on this episode. With that said, I'm going to give you one last story. And this story I've told a few times in very random places, but I have never told the full story. But I'm going to tell it here. When I was working in government at a facility, I guess it would be west of Bixby, near Glenpool, I had a coworker or a staff member. I guess he was a coworker. I ended up being his boss later on. But anyways, our boss was new. He had only been there probably less than a month. And there was something said that I don't really remember what was really said, but I just know it really made my coworker mad. Well, he's a Cherokee guy, and he takes it very seriously. When you claim to be Cherokee, he took it very, very serious. Now, I don't know what the conversation was, but he came to me after work that day. And he's like, you know, I'm real upset at him. I'm gonna make sure, you know, he gets his. I was like, well, you better not bring it towards me. That's all I got to say. He's like, oh, no, I would never. No, I'd never do that. So I was like, all right, cool. So the next day, we come in, and my boss at the time, he's like, hey, I got to talk to you real quick. I said, what's going on? He's like, oh, well, he said, I need to ask you a question about this. I said, well, what is it? You know, he's kind of beating, you know, he's kind of traveling around the bush. He's beating around him, really trying to say it. I think he's kind of embarrassed. But he said, I got home, and my wife was real kind of spooked out. I said, what happened? He said, well, she said that she saw something standing in the roadway, and it was dressed in a white wolf outfit. Like it looked like it had a white wolf around its back. And I looked at him, I said, well, did you see it? She's like, no, but she could see it. I couldn't see it. And I said, well, what did it do? He said, it kept moving closer. I said, I have an idea. I think I didn't say this to him, but in my head, I said, it's our coworker. He's doing something because he was into that stuff. So I asked him, I said, you tell me, I said, did you take a picture of it? And he's like, yeah, I took a picture of it, but nothing showed up. I said, well, you need to delete that picture right now. I said, because you may not see it, but your wife does. And whoever is doing this to you is not attacking you, is attacking the people around you. And so he's looking at me. He's like, all right, well, and I was like, well, I'll tell her to do that. I said, okay, well, we go about our day. And then the next day he was telling me his wife, it was getting closer to the door. So when he got home, she was like, yeah, I literally was standing like in the yard now. Every time she would look out there, it was like it was moving closer. And I told him, I said, you don't believe in what he's doing, but you need, whatever you believe in, you need to do that. He said, okay, I'll do that. So then come find out, I asked the coworker, I said, are you messing with him? And he's like, well, he's trying to beat around the bush. I said, no. I said, are you messing with him? He claimed he was Cherokee. He's not Cherokee. I said, but I told him, I said, well, you got to quit messing with him. He's, well, boy, but he never fully admitted that he was doing it. He was just upset at the coworker. And to this day, I think that it was him or something he'd conjured to go mess with him and his family. Oh, and my boss at the time was upset. But I truly don't know what his wife saw. He's just telling me what his wife's seeing. But she said it looked like some really tall person, skinny, frail, wearing a wolf's head. I said, couldn't have been dog, man. And be in mind that where this guy lived, he lived in the middle of Tulsa. like almost Cherry Street, Tulsa. Hardly any really like shrubs. So I was like, it can't be Dogman. So I'm just trying to help him, but I knew what it was. And so I just told him, keep, doing your beliefs and what you believe in, and it'll eventually, keep it more away from you. And eventually he said it stopped after I kind of had this talk. But you just never know, man. I was always told, don't accept nothing at powwows or, anything like that, because you just don't know what somebody, is feeling a type of way towards you. And that's an indirect way of them entering your life. So that's all I have for this episode. Like I said, mentioned before, TikTok, Warcry Pod, YouTube, Warcry Podcast, Apple, Spotify, everywhere. Wherever you can get a podcast, I'm there. And I appreciate you guys supporting me in the podcast. And I really want to say thank you to the people who gave kind words and different comments. I really appreciate it. It means more to me than you realize. But for this episode, we're done. And I'll catch you on the next one.